An anniversary. 2 years ago today, a Capitol Hill police officer called Michael Byrd shot an unarmed woman in the neck. At the time of that killing, Byrd had a documented history of gross negligence with a firearm. He left a loaded Glock pistol in a public men's room at the Capitol, which for a law enforcement official is a firing offense. But for some reason, Michael Byrd was still in the force that day. The woman he killed was called Ashli Babbit. Babbit was a married 14-year veteran of the U.S. military. She ran a pool cleaning company with her husband in San Diego. Physically, she was tiny. She was also unarmed. Michael Byrd later admitted he had no indication at all that Babbit was carrying a weapon. She posed no visible threat. He killed her anyway. Under normal circumstances, Byrd would have been fired immediately and charged with murder, which he clearly committed. But that's not what happened. After doing essentially no investigation into the shooting, Nancy Pelosi's congressional police force declared Byrd a national hero, and the media strongly agreed. Byrd went on television to accept accolades and to complain about racism. He was never punished for killing Ashli Babbit. He was rewarded for it. Ashli Babbitt's mother, meanwhile, got a very different sort of treatment. Babbitt's mother was arrested today in Washington by the Capitol Police. Her crime? Trying to hold a memorial service for her daughter. 2 years later, it's clear that Ashli Babbit her death is by far the most significant thing that happened at the U.S. Capitol building that day. But at the same time, it is the least talked about event of January 6th. Why is that? Well, because the facts about what actually happened on January 6th disrupt the lies, what they've told you happened on January 6th. And those lies have proven very useful to the Biden administration and to permanent Washington. On the basis of a wholly created myth about what happened that day, the Biden Pentagon conducted an unprecedented political purge of the entire U.S. military. The FBI and various intel agencies increased their control over the American media. And most obviously, the DOJ has been allowed to prosecute and jail hundreds of nonviolent political protesters whose crime was having the wrong opinions. Lies about January 6th, which have been relentless, have enabled some of the most unscrupulous people in our country to make a mockery of our Bill of Rights and to steal our core freedoms. So they can't talk about Ashli Babbit. Talking about Ashli Babbit makes it very clear who the real culprits are and who the real threats to this country continue to be. And they're not the January 6th protesters. So instead, they lie about what happened that day, and they do it in the boldest possible ways, without shame and with maximum aggression. Here's Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the Democrats in the House, telling you that 5 police officers were killed on January 6th, when in fact the real total is 0.
We are gathered here to honor their memory and acknowledge with deep gratitude the tremendous bravery of the hundreds of officers who defended us at this citadel of democracy that fateful day. As a result of the events on January 6th, the lives of 5 heroic officers were lost.
5 heroic officers were lost, he said. It's almost impossible to believe that adults could stand behind him as he said that, because everyone in the picture you just saw knows that is not true. It's not a stilted interpretation of events. It's a flat-out lie. No police officers were killed on January 6th, period. Ashli Babbit was killed on January 6th. But chances are your grandchildren will not know that, because history will likely record the lie you just heard as true, simply because it's been repeated so often. Everyone in authority has said the same thing in unison for 2 solid years. As our thoroughly dishonest Attorney General recently put it, quote, "We will never forget the 5 officers who responded selflessly on January 6th and who have since lost their lives." His boss, Joe Biden, repeated that lie today from the White House.
These people and the people representing those who couldn't be here because they gave their lives for this is incredibly consequential. And that's not political talk, that's historical fact.
That's historical fact, says Joe Biden, as he manufactures history, as he tells lies. They've been doing this, telling these same lies since the very first day, January 6th, 2021, almost like it was a coordinated operation. Remember when they told you that Officer Brian Sicknick, was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher?
Officer Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher.
Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the hours-long attack.
They beat a Capitol police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
That's not true. And in the end, thanks to the medical examiner in the District of Columbia, we learned the fact, which is that Brian Sicknick died of a stroke well after the January 6th protests. He was not beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. But that did not stop their lying or even slow them down. Joe Biden just awarded one of this country's highest civilian honors, the Presidential Citizens Medal, to officers working on January 6th. And that would include the officers who opened the doors of the Capitol building to the so-called insurrectionists. The officers who let them inside and then were rewarded for it by the President of the United States. What's going on here, you may wonder? Well, don't ask. You're not allowed to know what's going on here. Nor can you know about the very obvious clandestine role of federal agencies that encouraged the events of January 6th. That happened, but its details have never been explained. A lot has still not been explained from that day, despite a committee that was impaneled for more than a year. For example, you remember the pipe bomber who planted explosives outside the Democratic National Committee? Well, those explosives, it turns out, were under a bench at the same moment that Kamala Harris, who had Secret Service protection with her, who swept the building, was there. So how did the U.S. Secret Service miss a bomb sitting in plain sight during its security sweep? Well, we can't answer that because the FBI still, to this day, refuses to release all the security footage. Why? What's going on here? Almost unique among media outlets, Revolver News asked that question.
The pipe bomber even looks at camera to head on, for some reason. It's very frustrating, because we can't see the moment the pipe bomber plants the pipe bomb, but the FBI can. That's because the whole scene should be captured on camera 1 as well, and much more clearly than camera 2. Camera 1 has a clear shot of both benches. If the FBI released the full tape from camera 1, we could see the pipe bomber planting the bomb.
So somebody planted bombs outside the headquarters of this country's two main political parties. That would seem to be a big story, and yet no one ever mentions it again, including the FBI. In fact, the Bureau won't disclose any information about the suspect, not his height, weight, shoe size, anything. So if they wanted to catch this person, wouldn't they be telling you all they can about who it is? But they're not. Why aren't they? And what was Kamala Harris doing there? Why did she lie about being there? We can't answer those questions. We should be able to. Nor does anyone in authority want to talk about Ray Epps. Ray Epps, of course, is the man who was caught on tape encouraging the crowd outside the Capitol, both on January 5th and 6th, to commit felonies by rushing inside. Now, what's interesting is that the January 6th committee, under public pressure, did in the end interview Ray Epps. Now, we don't have all of the committee's records about that interview. We should, but we don't. But some have been released, and what they tell is a remarkable story. In the testimony that we have, the committee coaches Ray Epps on how to answer questions about his involvement. Quote, "I was in the front with a few others. I also orchestrated it. I helped get people there." End quote. Now, Epps admitted that in a text message to a relative on January 6th. He's admitting crimes. He's never been even charged for those crimes. But what's so fascinating is that when those facts came up in his interview with the committee, someone on the committee responds this way, and we're quoting, "I just want to understand a little more your use of the word orchestrated. It sounds to me like at this point, when you sent this text, you had turned away in part because of seeing some things that you didn't agree with. Is that right? Like when you sent this, you were already on your way from the Capitol because of concerns of people taking it in a different direction." Is that the most leading question ever asked in the history of a congressional hearing? Probably. And the whole interview goes on like this. Keep in mind, Ray Epps is one of the only people caught on camera that day encouraging others to break the law. He's one of the only ones. And yet he's never been charged. And the January 6th committee was on his side. Why was the committee and its members working so hard to help Ray Epps? Now, in his interview with the committee, Ray Epps said he didn't work for law enforcement, in a very specifically worded answer, clearly thought through ahead of time. The question is, did Ray Epps work or have any contact with any government agency? Did he talk about January 6th before it happened with any employee of the U.S. government? We don't know. We do know that 2 years after January 6th, long after an awful lot of other people have gone to jail for walking around the Capitol building, Ray Epps is still a free man. He's never been charged, much less imprisoned in solitary confinement like so many others. Why is that? Well, let's just stop lying. At this point, it's pretty obvious why that is. But of course, they're still lying about it. Julie Kelly is one of the very few reporters in America who has covered this story honestly since the first day. She's the author of the book January 6th, and we are honored to have her join us tonight. Julie Kelly, thank you so much for coming on. Can you just give us a couple, since you are the human encyclopedia on January 6th, I would say, a repository of all the information. I mean, just give us a very quick overview of the scale of the law enforcement response to what happened 2 years ago today.
So, Tucker, what we have now are almost 1,000 criminal defendants related to their involvement in January 6th. What the FBI and Department of Justice now is warning is that figure will double by the time that they're done. They believe that they have 2,000 perpetrators of the alleged insurrection, and they are going to continue this manhunt for Trump supporters into this year. And so you had the FBI official this week, the new head of the Washington, D.C. field office, say this investigation will go on for years. So what is this about? This is not about making sure that people who really committed violence, a small handful that day, are brought to justice. This is to perpetuate Joe Biden and the Department of Justice and FBI's phony narrative that domestic terrorists, i.e. Trump supporters, pose a grave threat to this country. It's really shameful. It has resulted in the destruction of so many innocent lives and their families. The FBI continues to arrest people almost every week. And I believe right now we have at least 100 people incarcerated behind bars, either under pretrial detention or serving out excessive prison sentences for either plea deals or being convicted by a jury in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, while rapists go free and 7 million foreign nationals flood into our country. I have to say, since you're in contact with an awful lot of people who've been swept up in this and who are also researching it, at this point, does any honest person believe that the feds were all over this? I mean, parts of this were clearly influenced by federal agencies. I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory, is it?
Well, it's not, and that's why I think it's interesting, Tucker, that in an 845-page investigative report by the January 6th committee, Christopher Wray's name is not mentioned a single time. They didn't even interview FBI Director Christopher Wray. Now, why is that? They also didn't interview Stephen D'Antuono, the newly retired head of the Washington field office, who was in charge of FBI agents, informants, et cetera, assets on January 6, 2021.
I mean, we made a documentary on this a year ago, as you know, and you helped us with it. And we were attacked widely by a lot of Republicans, too, for mentioning the obvious, which is the feds had a hand in this. Will we ever know the truth, do you think?
We have to. We now know for a fact, Tucker, because of these trials, that there were informants months before January 6th run into the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, at least 8 informants in the Proud Boys months before January 6th. What were they doing? We have to find out.
I think we do. Julie Kelly, thank you for your relentless, dogged reporting on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
So the one person we know for a fact was murdered, killed without justification on January 6th, 2021, was Ashli Babbit, an unarmed 14-year military veteran. And she's the one person whose name was not mentioned during any of the official January 6th memorials. Instead, Ashli Babbitt's mother, Mickey Whithoft, was arrested today by the Capitol Police. She was apparently at the Capitol to memorialize her daughter's death. Police say she was jaywalking, so they put her in handcuffs. Hard to believe, but here's the footage.
You murdered her inside the Capitol, now you're going to arrest her? Come out of there.
101, have a transport response. Sidewalk! Now! I ain't fucking trapped! Move to the sidewalk! You got 2 cars!
2 years ago in the Capitol.
I did not murder her daughter.
So her daughter was shot to death, unarmed, with no stated justification by an officer who shouldn't have been on the force, with a documented history of the reckless use of firearms, and it's the mother who gets arrested for jaywalking at a memorial for her own daughter. You wonder how much more of this the country can take. Aaron Babbit has suffered for 2 years because of it. Of course, he is the husband of Ashli Babbit, and we are happy to have him join us tonight. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. I have to ask you about the arrest of your mother-in-law by the same police force that killed your wife.
Yeah, I just saw that video for the first time when I was coming into the studio. My phone was blowing up. A little backstory on that. Mickey's actually been in D.C. since the beginning of August. She's been there every day, living in that area, sitting outside the jail at night and protesting outside the Capitol. So I'm not going to say it's a coincidence. She was finally arrested on January 6th, but that doesn't really smell right.
Well, it's beyond. On the 2-year anniversary of her daughter's killing, it's beyond. And I've asked you this before, but I have to ask you again. Has anyone in elected office reached out to take your side, to take up your case to get justice for your wife who was killed without justification that day?
It's still the same. Troy Nels, Louis Gohmert, but he's out now. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz. I'm sure there's a couple other, Paul Gosar. There's a couple other ones, but it's still that very small. It's a very small percentage.
Looking back 2 years to the day after her killing, what do you make of it? How would you sum up this experience?
I mean, for me personally, I've learned over these last 2 years, it's never going to get easier losing her. It just gets a little bit different every day. And I'm just in full force mode of continue my fight for Ashli, and that's what I will continue to do.
Well, I hope you prevail. You can't just shoot people and then move on. And I hope you won't let them. Aaron Babbit, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So earlier this week, as Kevin McCarthy struggled to win over recalcitrant Republicans and support him to become the next Speaker of the House, we offered up a suggestion for what McCarthy could do, an important reform. And it looks like McCarthy, who is apparently on his way to becoming Speaker, has taken up that idea. We'll speak to a member of Congress who will be quarterbacking that for him. Plus, there is a war going on in our neighbor to the south in Mexico, a hot war. People are trying to shoot down airplanes. This has not gotten a lot of coverage. It needs a lot of coverage, and it suggests big changes for us. When you have a war on your border, things are different. We'll get the very latest on that next.
Magnesium is vital for bone, nerve, and muscle health. I recommend Cunol Extra Strength Magnesium. Unlike regular magnesium, Cunol's high absorption helps you get the full benefits of magnesium. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, and I'm excited to announce my original My Slippers are back in stock. You've made them a huge success, and now I've added smaller sizes, larger sizes, wide sizes, and all new colors. And with your promo code, you still save $90 a pair. Not only that, I'm having the biggest closeout sale ever on our sandals and slides for as low as $19.98. What makes My Slippers different?